There's a request for Surah Fatiha for Haydar Zaidi. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله روحي وجسمي وأرواح العالمين لك الفداء يا غريب يا مظلوم يا شهيد بأرض كربلاء أما بعد وقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الدين عند الله الإسلام صلوا على محمد وآله
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
وعليكم السلام.
Just want to say thank you everybody for your kind comments, for your hospitality, your generosity. It's always a pleasure to come to Phoenix, apart from the congregation. It's a big change in weather also from Canada. So it's always a pleasure to be here, to get some heat at least. Islam is the submission to Allah, as we are aware. But that's not the end. In fact, that's only the beginning. Because submission is the first step. After Islam comes Iman. After you submit to Allah, Iman is the close connection, divine connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, how you respond to the challenge of the divine, to the challenge of submission. You don't just say Allahu Akbar and I submit, but you have to act upon it. And therefore, wherever the Quran mentions Iman, as we are aware, it mentions Amal Salih, some kind of good action with it. Then the next step after Iman is Ihsan. In other words, to do beautiful deeds in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not just good deeds, the most beautiful deeds. Because Ihsan is a level whereby you know that Allah is watching what you are doing. He is aware and you are aware of His presence. That whatever I am doing, even if nobody is watching me here, somebody is watching me up there. The next and last step after Ihsan is called Ikhlas. Ikhlas means purity. What it refers to is not only knowing that Allah is watching you, but that Allah is also aware of what you are thinking. In other words, your innermost thoughts, whatever you feel, whatever you conceive, whatever you think, Allah is aware of that also. وَهُوَ يَعْلُمُ مَا فِي الصُّدُورِ, as Allah says, that Allah is aware of what is in your chest, what is in your heart. So when you go to that level, then not only are your actions pure and beautiful, but even your thought patterns are beautiful too. Because after all, our actions are a product of what we think, of how we think. If your thinking is good, then the actions are going to be good. But I want to focus at the first level today. Because in my understanding, we have not really understood what Islam means. For us then, Islam is a 7th century religion. We say that my religion is Islam, I am a Muslim. We all say that. But what does Islam actually mean? There is a difference in English between a noun and a verbal noun. A bit of English grammar for you. A noun, a book, a pen, these are nouns, a tree. Whereas a verbal noun is an act of doing something, teaching, speaking, sleeping, eating. These are acts of doing, these are verbal nouns. In the Quran, Islam is not used as a noun. It is used as an act of doing something. In other words, it's a response to the divine challenge that come and submit to me as a first step towards actually coming towards me. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
To put it differently then, the Quran is using the word Islam as an Islaming, if you like, submitting. Why am I stressing this? Because when you look at Islam as an act, not as a noun, not as a thing, not as a religion, but as an act of submission, then Islam becomes a very dynamic, vibrant, active response to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, it's interesting that in Arabic, we never say, unlike in English, you say, I have faith in God. When you have faith, means I have it, it's something very passive. But in Arabic, you never ever say, I have faith in God. You never say, li iman billahi, or indi iman. It doesn't make sense. What you're actually saying is, amantu billahi, u'minu billahi, which literally when you translate it, is awkward to translate. But literally when you translate it, it means, I am doing faith to Allah. I am acting out my faith to Allah. Because to have something is a very passive thing. I have it, I don't have it. But when you are doing something, it's actually an action. So Islam then is an action-minded program. It's in the Quran does not use the word Islam as opposed to Christianity, as opposed to Judaism. Rather, it uses the word Islam as an active submission to the will of Allah. Similarly, even the word deen, we understand, again, the problem is this, and we don't quite understand this, that words change meaning with time. What a word meant 1400 years ago does not necessarily mean the same thing today. Therefore, we understand deen as religion. Ye mera deen hai. This is my religion. In fact, the Quran uses the word deen in multiple ways. Deen is not only a religion, it is a path towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, when you are following the deen of Islam, you are literally charting out a path in order to actively submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you understand the difference? And therefore, if we were to translate deen as religion, then how are we going to translate Maliki Yawmiddin? He is the master of the day of religion? It doesn't make sense, does it? The day of religion? Here the word deen means the day of accountability, Yawm al-Qiyamah. In other words, when we as human beings will be standing up in front of our Lord, in front of our Maker, to account for our deeds. In the olden days, interestingly, when you read the early literature, the Muslims themselves understood deen very differently from the way that we understood it. So there were two types of Shias. In fact, there were more than two, 3, 4 types. There were the Shia to Ali, there were the Shia to Uthman, Shia to Muawiyah, and so on. Shia meaning here followers of Ali, followers of Uthman, and so on. They were telling each other, Ana dinu Ali, Ana dinu Muawiyah. For example, you read that. That doesn't mean they have different religions. They have different paths. They have different ways. And therefore, what this tells us is this, that a Muslim in the Quran is not one who accepts the 7th century religion. I'm talking about the Quranic understanding. A Muslim is the one who actively, conscientiously, willingly submits to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a big difference between just accepting a religion and conscientiously, willingly gives himself or herself to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, we find that in the Quran, Islam gets attention. But Iman is even more important in the Quran than Islam. Why? Because Iman is the second step. Islam is mentioned 8 times. But Iman is mentioned 45 times. Why? Because Iman is an active submission and close connection with the divine. I was saying yesterday in the Jum'ah that we, again in English, this is not very apparent. The problem with English language is very poor. In Arabic, the word ayn, for example, has about 70 meanings. Ayn can mean eyes, it can mean spring, it can mean the essence, and so on. So therefore, to translate from Arabic to English is problematic for many of us. But in In Arabic, Iman is not something that you have, as I said, it's something that you do. But in Arabic, we also distinguish between Iman and Aqidah. And here is an issue that we need to understand between belief and faith. We all understand belief and faith is the same thing. I believe in God, I have faith in God. But actually there is a big difference. We all believe in Allah, we all believe in the Muwat and so on. We believe in Shaitan too, that Shaitan exists. If you don't believe that, then you're disbelieving in the Quran, because the Quran says it. But you believe in Shaitan, but you cannot have faith in Shaitan. Because if you have faith in Shaitan, you're in trouble, my friend. In other words, belief is something that we share. Whereas Aqidah, or whereas Iman or faith is the close connection between the human and the divine. So whereas we have the same beliefs, we do not have the same faith. We do not have the same Iman. Because the way that we connect with Allah is going to be different. My Iman is different from your Iman. Different from her Iman. Because we all connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our own very different ways. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
So many times, I do not know whether you face this situation, youth come and tell me, especially Pakistani youth says, my daddy wants me to go to Pakistan during the summer. I said, why? He said, so that I become a better Muslim. I said, oh, Islam resides in Pakistan, huh? My friend, Islam does not reside in Pakistan, it resides in your heart. Faith does not depend on where you are, faith depends on who you are. You can be in Makkah and be the perfect kafir and hypocrite. You can be in Timbuktu and be the best Muslim. And you can be in Yellowknife or Barrow or the North Pole and be the best Muslim. In other words, faith goes with you in your heart. Faith does not depend on where you are. Faith depends on who you are. It is because of this understanding of the word Islam that we find that even in the Quran, the Muslim is used not only for those who accept 7th century Islam that we understand. A Muslim in the Quran is anybody who submits himself or herself willingly, conscientiously to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, you'll find Ibrahim alayhi salam is said that Ana awwal al-Muslimin. I'm the first Muslim in his time. There were Muslims before, but in his time, after all, he was not a Muslim in the sense that you and me are Muslims. He did not believe in the sense that we believe in the last prophet. The last prophet was not there during his time. When he says, Ana awwal al-Muslimin, I am the first amongst the Muslims, he means that I am the first who submit to him. Even, you remember the story of the magicians of Pharaoh. When they saw what the staff, the rod, the stick of Musa did, they submitted themselves immediately. Amanna bi Rabbil Alameen, Amanna bi Rabbi Musa wa Harun. We believe in the Lord of Harun, we believe in the Lord of Musa, we believe in the Lord of the universe. They are being threatened to die at that time. Pharaoh says, لَأَقْتِيَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ. I will most certainly cut your hands and your feet from different sides. وَلَوْسَلِّبَنَّكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. I will most certainly crucify all of you. They are being threatened with death. These magicians who were the champions of Pharaoh a moment ago, now they are the best Muslims. They have submitted themselves. And therefore the recited dua, it is preserved in the Quran, by the way. These magicians of Pharaoh who lived 2,000 years before the Prophet, they say, رَبَّنَا أَفْرِغْ عَلَيْنَا صَبْرًا وَتَوَفَّنَا مُسْلِمِينَ. Oh Lord, grant us solitude and complete perseverance. Grant us sabr and make us die as Muslims. These Muslims are those who came 2,000 years before the Prophet himself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
And to go and show you further how the Quran uses the word Muslim, very different from the way that we understand it. You might not want to read it tonight, this particular surah, maybe tomorrow morning, because it's called Surah Al-Jinnah, surah number 72 in the Quran. When the jinns hear the Quran being recited, according to the Quran itself, they say that we have had a wonderful word. But amongst the jinns are those who submit, and there are those who do not submit. In other words, وَإِنَّ مِنَّ الْمُسْلِمُونَ, amongst us are those who are Muslims. وَمِنَّ الْقَاسِتُونَ, amongst us are those who swerve away, who deviate from that. There are no Muslim genes and Christian genes and Hindu genes, my friends. When the Quran says, وَإِنَّ مِنَّ الْمُسْلِمُونَ, we are, amongst us are Muslims, it means we are the ones who submitted to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, there are Muslim genes in that sense, those who submit to the will of Allah. If Islam then is seen as a very active, vibrant submission to the will of Allah, kufr is also the opposite. Because nobody is born kafir. No child is born kafir. In fact, we say a child is born ma'soom. He or she is born with a clean slate. Kufr is a conscientious act, just as Islam, the act of submission, is conscientious, so is kufr. Nobody is biologically kafir. Nobody has got kafir, kufr in his DNA. Otherwise we complain to Allah that you made me born a kafir. In other words, just as a Muslim is responding to Allah, a kafir is responding too, but responding wrongly, responding incorrectly. A kafir is one who lacks a sense of direction, of morality, because instead of devoting himself only to one, he is devoting himself to everyone. As Allama Iqbal, and you know Allama Iqbal better than me, जो एक का सजदा नहीं करता, वो हर एक का सजदा करता है. The one who does not do sajda to one, does sajda to everyone. In other words, we need to respond, but respond correctly. Kufr, as I said, is not a natural state. Rather, it is a turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kufr is not only turning away, it is also an act of hiding the truth. Literally, kafir is one who is ungrateful in the Quran. Inna hadaynahu sabila, imma shakiran, imma kafura. The Quran says, we have guided human beings to the truth. Either he or she is a shakir, in other words, he or she is thankful, merciful, and thanks us, grateful, or ungrateful. In other words, if I give you something, which I will not, but if I do, and if you say thank you, then you are a shakir. But if you don't even thank, that's a kafir. That's why shaitan is called a kafir in the Quran. Shaitan believed in Allah. That wasn't the problem. The problem was he was ungrateful to the mercy and the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Musa is going to Fir'aun and telling him that you should believe in one God, Fir'aun calls Musa a kafir in the Quran. Kafir in the sense that I brought you up in my house. I gave you all the favors, now you're turning against me. In other words, a kafir is one not only who does not believe in Allah, but one who hides the truth, one who is ungrateful. In other words, just as there are those who are striving for Iman, there are those who are striving for kufr also. That is why Allama Iqbal, again to quote him, is so right when he says, the sign of a kafir is that he is lost in the horizon. The sign of a kafir is that he is lost in the horizon. The sign of a mu'min is that the horizon are lost in him. The horizon are lost in him. In other words, he can see Allah not only outside but inside him too. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi Muhammad. You will notice also one thing. Not only does the Quran talks about Islam and about Iman so much, it also talks about kufr so much, but it also describes the actions of the two. In other words, a true mu'min should have certain attributes in his or her actions. In other words, he or she should display those attributes which are godly attributes. Whereas a kafir is one who displays kufr-like attributes, arrogance, cheating and lying and so on. So it is surprising when a person who claims to be a Muslim, claims to be a mu'min, displays the attributes of a kafir. Because Iman is not only accepting Allah, but also displaying the attributes of the one who is actually within those, falls within that category of Iman. And therefore it is very important that we look at the Quran, what it says about the particular attributes. Unfortunately, I think that we have not paid enough importance to the Quran. We pay sometimes symbolic importance to the Quran. I don't know about your culture, but your culture is very close to our culture. We are the Khojas from Africa, but originally from India. But when a girl comes out of her house for the final time, Shadi Kirat, what we do is we take the Quran and put it on the head. You guys do the same? We put it on the head. I tell my people always, the Quran was not brought to be put on the head, it was brought to be put in the head. Right? Put it inside your head, not on top of your head. Because when you put it on your head, you're just giving it very kind of blessing, kind of the barakah only. The Quran did not come only for barakah. Yes, there is barakah in the Quran. But more barakah is when you actually internalize the message of the Quran. When you see the attributes that the Quran is displaying. And therefore I always say that there are two ways of looking at the Quran. Either as a glass or as a mirror. A window or a mirror. There's a difference between a window and a mirror, isn't there? Both are forms of glasses. But when you look at the window, you see the outside. When you look at the mirror, what happens? You see yourself. When we look at the Quran, we should not look at it as a window, but as a mirror. In other words, where do I fall within these attributes that the Quran is talking about? Do I fall within the attributes, na'udhu billah, of a kafir? Or that of a mu'min? If I do fall within the category of a kafir, I must do something and go and morally align myself to the right path of Iman. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It's, as I said, very important for us to realize this whole dynamic concept of Islam that the Quran is presenting, because we hardly talk about it. Sometimes I think that our actions, I like what we call a bumper sticker Islam. I was saying yesterday, bumper stickers? I love Allah, I love Iman, I love Islam, and so on. You've seen so many. I love Allah. I don't know how you can have Allah, because Al is already there in Allah anyway. But people write things. My friends, in the Quran, you will never find a verse in which Allah says, Allah yuhibbul Islam, that God loves Islam. We may love Islam, God doesn't love Islam. You know why? Because God doesn't love titles. He loves actions. Whenever the Quran mentions Allah yuhib, God loves, there is some kind of action after that. Allah yuhibbul muhsineen, Allah yuhibbul sabirin, Allah yuhibbul tawabin, and so on. Allah loves those who repent, those who do beautiful deeds, those who do good deeds, and so on. What it's telling us is that true Iman must always be connected with true actions. Otherwise there is no merit in that Iman. Because of this very vibrant, active understanding of Islam, something very important that you will notice. In today's world, you will have seen so many times, women in Islam, Hajj in Islam, they never talk of men in Islam, only women in Islam, economics in Islam, and so on. One thing remarkable is in the Quran, the word in Islam does not occur. It does not occur. You know why? Because you cannot have in eating, in playing, in reciting, in sleeping. It doesn't make sense. Because the Quran is using the word Islam as an act rather than as a noun, it never uses in Islam. We use it today because we have misunderstood the word Islam in the Quran. And therefore, the Quran is using the word Islam as an act rather than as a noun. The concept of Islam as a noun, as a religion rather than as an act, comes in the 13th century. For the first time we see the word in Islam appearing. 13th century. Before that, Islam was always understood very differently from the way that we understand it today. For the first time we find that Islam becomes an entity rather than an act. And the problem is this: when we talk of in Islam, we can also talk of out of Islam too, And if I'm in Islam and I don't agree with you, you can't be in Islam too. You have to be out of Islam. That's the problem of the fundamentalists today. They become judgmental of who is in Islam and who is out of Islam. If you and me don't agree, this is the fundamentalist view. I don't believe in that, by the way. If you and me do not agree, we disagree. And therefore, if I'm in Islam, you're out of Islam. If you're out of Islam, you're going to go to hell. And I'll do you a big favor and send you there faster. That is the mindset of this Taliban and Boko Haram and all these kind of guys that we hear about, ISIL and so on. Whereas it is actually haram to be judgmental. Again, I was saying it yesterday for the benefit of those who are not here in the Jum'ah, that Surah Al-Ra'd, Surah number 13 in the Quran, verse 40, when Allah is addressing the Prophet, He's not addressing us. Allah is addressing the Prophet. And even the Prophet was not allowed to be judgmental, because we cannot read the hearts of human beings. Therefore, the Quran addresses the Prophet and says, فَإِنَّمَا عَلَيْكَ الْبَلَاغَ وَعَلَيْنَا الْحِسَابِ. Allah says, upon you, O Muhammad, is to deliver the message. We will do the accounting. Only Allah has the right to do the accounting. There's a beautiful tradition that during the time of the Prophet, a person by the name of Zain, he was fighting in a war. Just as he was about to kill somebody, that person said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Zayd went and killed him anyway. And then Zayd went and told the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, this is what happened. I was about to kill him, but in order to save himself, he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. The Prophet said, did you open his heart to see why he said, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah? Do you have a right to judge when and how and where a person says the kalima? When the moment he submits to Allah, he becomes a Muslim in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether he did it for whatever reason, is between him and Allah. You are not supposed to kill him. He has submitted himself. He has stopped fighting. The point being that we as human beings cannot go around judging between in Islam and out of Islam. This is, by the way, a very powerful tool today, which is used by the Salafis and Wahhabis. It's called takfir. Takfir means to declare somebody a kafir. It is haram to do that, by the way. And you will see this. These guys are kafir. These guys have a long laundry list of who is a kafir. In fact, everybody but them is a kafir in their eyes. That's where the problem arises in Islam, where we start being so judgmental. Later on, we find that the word Islam changes meaning even more, whereby Islam is associated with the culture of a people, with their ways and habits and adab, as we say, their etiquettes. And therefore we find, for example, books written on Tarikhul Islam. Haven't you seen them? History of Islam. When you look at the word Islam, the way the Quran presented it, it is impossible to have the word Tarikhul Islam. You cannot have the history of eating, the history of speaking. It doesn't make sense. But because the word Islam changes meaning, when we say Tarikhul Islam, what we really mean is Tarikhul Muslimin. The history of the Muslims, their experience in history, because Islam itself does not have a history. The act of eating does not have a history. The act of submission does not have a history. What happens then? That the history of the Muslim people becomes associated with Islam itself, so much so that their culture is embedded in religion too. Their culture becomes part of religion. And sometimes that culture becomes more important than the religion itself. Again, I do not know about your culture. In my culture, on the Shab-e Barat is there, the wedding night, when the bride and the bridegroom are together, we're supposed to give the mahar first. My sisters, if your husband has not given you mahar, you can demand it tonight. It is your right. I know I'm getting a bit unpopular here, but I'm just telling you what Islam says. When I said this in Los Angeles when I was in Muharram, a lady came up to me and says, my husband hasn't given me mahar till today. He said, of course I did. He says, when did you give me? He said, the fact that I put up with you for all these years is my mahar to you, which is a bit cruel, but it goes to show how some people think. Mahar is supposed to be paid, half of it at the time of the aqd, the nikah, and the other half at the time of the consummation of the marriage. This is Islamic law. But in my culture, what we do is we give the gariyad, watch, to the woman. It's got nothing to do with Islam, but that's our custom. In fact, what has happened is, what is ibadat becomes adat, and what is adat becomes ibadat. We mix the two up. On the contrary, because of this whole connection, or rather confusion between religion and culture, what is Islam truly religious becomes cultural. So much so that now we have Islam in Africa, Islam in America, Islam in Canada, and so on. What that shows is that the culture of a people becomes so embedded that we are actually emphasizing the culture rather than the religious tradition. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. With history then, and I want to go to Masaib soon because the time is running short. With time then, the meaning of Islam not only changes, but what was clearly a submission, active, divine submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes a pattern of do's and don't do's only. In other words, we have reduced Islam, that active submission to the will of Allah, to ye karna wo nahi karna, becomes very, very minute, very, very almost parochial, narrow-minded. Many a time, and you find this in different parts of the world, Islam also becomes confused with superstitions, illogical things. My sisters and brothers, it is important for the younger generation, certainly, that we get back to the Islami haqiqi. When you talk to the younger generation, the youth, they will distinguish between our Islam and the Islam, they'll say. Our Islam is the Islam of emotions, the Islam of our own culture, whereas the Islam is the Islam of reason, the Islam that was introduced by the Quran itself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A new phenomenon which has arisen only the past 100 years or so is this term Islamic. Haven't you heard? Everything is Islamic now. Islamic culture, Islamic dress, Islamic music. No, I don't know how you can have Islamic music, and so on. This is a new nisbah. It's called adjective. It was never there before. The problem, and I use it too, we all use the term Islamic these days. The problem when you use Islamic is this, is that what is cultural becomes religion. By using the term Islamic, we make Islam monolithic, as if there are no nuances or differences between them. And consequently, we say that burqa is an Islamic dress. Burqa is not an Islamic dress, it's an Afghani dress, my friends. There is no such thing as an Islamic culture, because the act of submission cannot have a culture. We have Indian culture, African culture, and there's nothing wrong in it. Every people have their own culture. Pakistani culture, Arab culture, that's fine. But let's not bring Islam into it. You know why? Well, the problem with using the term Islamic, people define their own understanding of Islam and then impose it on others. If you recall, when India built that nuclear weapon, the bomb, it became an Indian bomb. When Pakistan did it, you remember what they called it? Islamic bomb. So now even bombs have got religion. Huh? How come they never called it a Hindu bomb at that time when India did it? When acts of terror were committed by the Irish, I was living in England at that time, in the 70s, you'll recall, for over 15 years, the people of Ireland were bombing even London. They never called them Catholic terrorists. They called them Irish terrorists. But when a Muslim does it, suddenly becomes Islamic terrorist. In other words, the term Islamic has become so overused and abused today that anything which happens in the name by a Muslim, even if he's deranged, even if he's mad, he still becomes Islamic. And therefore, we have to be very careful when we use such terms, because gradually when we use the term Islamic, and you find this so many a time, that Islam is becoming fighting against Islam. People in the name of Islam do horrendous things, and other people react, and therefore Islam fights against Islam. Everybody's using the Quran. That's why, as I said, we have to distinguish between the historical and the Quranic Islam. The Quranic Islam is one which is full of tolerance, of acceptance, of love. The historical Islam is very different. The Quranic Islam is the one which gave women the rights to vote, the women's rights to have expression. The historical Islam has subjugated women. The Quranic Islam talked of freedom of expression, freedom to choose whether to enter Islam or whether to leave Islam. The historical Islam is the opposite. Consequently, we have to distinguish between the two, because the historical Islam is the Islam that we have today many a time, which suppresses people in the name of Islam. Whereas Islam says, La ikraha fi din, that everybody has a right to choose their religion, their right on own opinion. The historical Islam actually subjugated people in the name of Islam. My friends, we do not possess God. We do not possess heaven. We only seek our way towards Allah, our way towards heaven itself. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
We are marking the wafat of Imam al-Sajjad today. Before I talk about his masayib, we should spend a few minutes to talk about his life itself. We heard an excellent rendition of the poem that Farazdak wrote. But Imam al-Sajjad lived at a very difficult time, as we are aware. He went through a very traumatic time. It is interesting to note, where does this term Zain-al-Abideen come from? It was given to him not by a Shia. Zain-al-Abideen means ibadat ka zinat, an ornament of worshipping. It was given to him by a person called Zuhri. Zuhri was not Shia at all. He was a Sunni, sometimes manufactured traditions for the Banu Umayyah. But he was so impressed by the piety, by the love and piety of Imam Zain-al-Abideen, that he gave Imam Zain-al-Abideen the title Zain-al-Abideen. He is also called a Sajjad. You know why Sajjad? In Arabic language, Sajid is one who prostrates, but one who prostrates all the time, whose habit it is to do something continuously, is called Sajjad. Sadama is to hit. One who hits a lot is called Saddam. One who punishes and hits a lot. Anything Kadhiba is one who lies. The one who lies perpetually all the time is called Kadhab. Therefore, Sajjad is one who is continuous in the act of sujood. Imam Zain-al-Abideen was such a sajid that whenever something good happened to him, he would first go into sajda. Even when something bad happened to him, he went into sajda. Ya Allah, I submit myself to your will. Even when two people fight, if he brought them together, he would do the sajda also. That's why he was called the Sajjad. Not only Sajjad, but Sayyidul Sajjad. In other words, the master, the leader of all those who do sajda all the time. His jihad was in a different way. Every imam taught us different things in their own ways. We are aware of the efforts of Imam Hussein in Karbala, of Imam al-Baqir, Imam Sadiq in establishing the madhab that we have today. But Imam Zain-al-Abideen's jihad, if you like, his instructions to us was through his du'as, was through his piety. Indeed, he has written wonderful du'as, the Sahifa Sajjadiyah. We should read them. The du'as are a way of instruction. What they do is this. They bring the transcendent, distant God to a very loving and close relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Consider some of the du'as, and I don't have the time to go through all of them, but just a few of them, to give you a gist of the kind of Allah that Imam Zain-al-Abideen wants us to connect to. He says in one of his du'as, this is a du'a of those who are talking to the beloved. Look at how he's addressing to Allah. Huh? The Muhib, Mahbub, one who is a loving God. Man dhal ladhi dhaqa halawata muhabbatik farama minka badala, he says. Who is the one who has tasted the sweetness of your love, O my Lord? This is Imam addressing Allah. That one who has tasted the sweetness of your love should go and seek love anywhere else. Kun anisi fi wahshati, ya Allah. Be my intimate companion in my hours of loneliness, ya Allah. This is Imam Zain-al-Abideen addressing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not only that, he's teaching us the attributes that we have, we receive from Allah. We are supposed to grow in those attributes of love and mercy and then ascend it towards Him. But we can only ascend towards Him if we do things for Him. When we do something, whenever you do something, don't expect anything else from anybody else. Just do it for the sake of Allah. You do good, not because you want to get any recognition. You do good because it's in you to do good. You know something? It is remarkable of Imam Zain-al-Abideen that when they were doing ghusl on him, they saw different kinds of marks on him. Marks on his shoulders, marks on his back. When they inquired, where did these marks come from? How come they are there? The marks on his back came because of the stripes that he was getting in Karbala and after Karbala. Whereas the marks on his shoulders, you know how they came about? Because in the middle of the night, when people were sleeping, our Imam would go through the streets of Medina to look for those who are needy and those who are unfortunate. This is the Imam who taught us, as-sadaqa taqa'u fi yadillahi qabla an taqa'u fi yadis sa'ir. That the sadaqah falls in the hands of Allah before it falls in the hand of the miskin, the one who's asking for it, the poor one. When you give something in secrecy, it first reaches Allah first before reaching the miskin. This is the kind of image that Imam Zain-al-Abideen has left for us, the legacy, to show you how he connected himself with Allah, how he saw Allah as a merciful God. There was a theologian in the time of Imam Zain-al-Abideen. His name was Hassan al-Basri. Hassan al-Basri was one of those very fearful mystic, as they call him. He always used to weep and see Allah as a very punishing God. So he was to have sessions, and he would say, Hassan al-Basri would say, Ajibtu liman najia, kayfa najia ma'a adhabillah. I'm surprised, Hassan al-Basri says, at that person who is saved on the day of Qiyamah. How can he be saved given the punishment of Allah? Given that Allah punishes so much, how can he be saved? One of the students of Hassan al-Basri came and told Imam Zain-al-Abideen that this is what Hassan al-Basri is saying. I'm surprised at that person who is saved. How can he be saved given the punishment of Allah? Imam Zain-al-Abideen says, go and tell Hassan al-Basri that Ali ibn al-Hussein is saying, Ajibtu liman halaka, kayfa halaka ma'a sa'ati rahmatillah. I'm surprised at that person who is destroyed and punished. How can he be punished given the vast extent of Allah's mercy? This is how Imam Zain-al-Abideen saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as one who is merciful and encompassing in his mercy. I want to translate very briefly the poem of Farazdak that the Sheikh was reciting in front of us. It's a beautiful poem for those who missed it, that Farazdak composed when Hisham ibn Abdul Malik was very angry when he was trying to go to Hajar al-Aswad but could not, but the Imam was able to do so. Very briefly, when Hisham said, who is this person? How can he just go and kiss Hajar al-Aswad and I cannot? Who is this person? And Farazdak composed. He says, this is the son of Hussein, the grandson of Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, through whom the darkness has disappeared. This is he whose ability even the valley of Makkah recognizes him. He is the one who is known by the sacred house. In other words, the Kaaba knows him, but you don't know him. The holy sanctuary and what is around the sanctuary know him and acknowledge him. This is the son of the best of Allah's servants. This man, Farazdak is saying regarding Imam Zain-al-Abideen, he is the most pure, pious man, the most eminent man. When the Quraysh see him, their spokesman says, liberality terminates and the outstanding qualities of this man. When he comes to touch the wall of the Kaaba, it almost grasps his hand. In other words, instead of him going to the Kaaba and touching it, the Hajar al-Aswad comes out to touch him. He takes care to be modest and he's protected from his fears. And then he continues a long thing, I don't want to go into it, but he says, he is like the sun from whom the darkness disperses, because it is in his house that the Quran has been revealed. If you do not know him, then you do not know Allah himself, because it is through him that you can find the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Azadarana Hussein, it's time for the Messiah. Our Imam died gharib. He died having suffered so much. It is said that one day he was walking through the streets of Medina and he saw that a butcher was selling some meat. The Imam went and greeted him and he said, did you give that animal some water to drink before you butchered it? The butcher says, Yabna Rasulullah, this is a sunnah. Of course, even the animals get water before they are butchered. The Imam says, hi, it was my father that we saw who was butchered in front of us. For 3 days, he had no water, he had no food. And up to the last moment, he asked for water, but they denied him. Azadarana Hussein, What can I tell you of the trauma of Imam al-Sajjad? Can you imagine the day of Ashur, when he was sleeping and suddenly his aunt Zainab comes to him, says, "Beta Sajjad, wake up. Your father has come to you to bid farewell." Imam Zain-al-Abideen opens his eyes, and the first thing when he sees Imam Hussein in that state, the first question that he asks is, "Ya Abata, Aina Ammi Abbas?" Where is my uncle Abbas? Because he knew that if Abbas was alive, Imam Hussein would not be in this state at all. Imam Hussein gives a wasiyah to Zain-al-Abideen. At one time on the day of Ashur, Zain-al-Abideen is in his tent, and Zainab comes to him, says, "Beta Sajjad, come outside." When he comes outside, what does he see? The head of his father at the end of the spear. This is the trauma that Imam Zain-al-Abideen had to endure. Oh, we have to pay homage, we have to thank our Lady Zainab, because on no less than 3 occasions she saved the life of Imam al-Sajjad. The first time was on Sham Gharibah, when Ibn Sa'd and his army came to the tents. It was Bibi Zainab who carried Sayyid al-Sajjad out of the burning tents because he could not even walk. The second time was in the darbar of Ibn Ziyad. When Ibn Ziyad saw Zain-al-Abideen, he said, "How come he is alive? I thought all male adults were killed." Zainab came between Ibn Ziyad and Sayyid al-Sajjad, and she said, "Ibn Ziyad, you will have to kill me first before you kill him." The third time in the darbar of Yazid, the same thing happened also. Azadaran Hussein, this was Sayyid al-Sajjad, walking in chains, hot chains which were eating into his skin, from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham. What can I tell you of the Sayyid al-Sajjad? A time came when the Kafila was resting as it was moving. It rested, but Sayyid al-Sajjad, our Imam, was not allowed to rest under the shade. He was told that you will rest under the hot sun. When the sun was too overpowerful, overbearing, the Imam moved a little bit towards the shade, because the chains were eating into his skin. At that time, a person who was Qasiyatul Qulub, who was stone-hearted, called Hasin bin Numair, he came and whipped the Imam. "I told you not to move." Hayazadar al-Hussein, this same Hasin bin Numair, when the army of Mukhtar and Ibn Zubair were after those who had killed Imam Hussein, this same Hasin came to Imam al-Sajjad in Medina. He thought that the Imam will not recognize him. Hasin came to the Imam, he says, "Give me shelter, Ya Abda Rasulillah. They are after me." The Imam welcomed him for 3 days. This same Hasin stayed with the Imam. He ate at his place. He slept at his place. After 3 days, Hasin is leaving the house of the Imam, but he was ashamed. He wanted to know if the Imam recognized him. He said, "Ya Ibn Rasulillah, do you recognize who I am?" The Imam says, "Yes, I know who you are. You are Hasin bin Numair." Hasin says, "Mawla, how come you treated me so nicely when I treated you so badly?" The Imam says, "This is a difference between you and us. When I was your guest, that's how you treated me. Today you are my guest. This is how I am told to treat you." Azadaran Hussein, look at the trauma of Imam Zain-al-Abideen in Sham. When he enters, he see an old man who was gloating, who was celebrating, and he said to the Imam, "Look at how Allah has dealt with you." At that point, the Imam turns towards this old man. He says, "Ya Shaykh, At-Taqra'ul Quran? Do you recite the Quran?" The Shaykh says, "Yes, I recite the Quran." The Imam says, "Have you seen this verse? Innama yuridullahu?" He says, "Yes, I've seen it." "Have you seen this verse in which Allah says, La as'alukum alayhi ajra?" He says, "Yes, I've seen this." The Shaykh says, "Why are you asking me about these verses? What have they got to do with you?" The Imam says, "Don't you know we are the Ahle Rasul? The Quran was revealed in our house. These verses were revealed about us. Abbas, the Sheikh says, oh my Lord, oh my master, forgive me. I did not know this. Hi, Sayyid al-Sajjad is in Damascus now as Yazid in front of everybody. He's trying to celebrate and boast of what he has done. Imam Zain-al-Abideen stands up in front of everybody and he says, Ana ibn Makkah, Ana ibn Safa al-Marwa, Ana ibn Rasulullah. I am the son of the Prophet of God. When Imam Zain-al-Abideen started speaking, Yazid says to Muazzin, oh Muazzin, go and recite the adhan so that we can silence Sayyid al-Sajjad. At that point when the Muazzin recited Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, at that point Imam Zain-al-Abideen stood up again during the adhan. He says, oh Yazid, tell me, this Muhammad that you are reciting, is he your grandfather or my grandfather? Why have you killed ours, oh Yazid? What wrong have we done to you? Why is it that your women wear the parda, but our women do not have the parda? Azadar and Hussein, I have finished my majlis, but as the kafilah is heading back to Medina, as they go near Medina, Imam Zain-al-Abideen turns to Bashir bin Jaslam, says, Bashir, go and tell the people of Yathrib, the Ahlul Bayt are coming back. When the people of Medina hear, they heard that the kafilah is coming back, they reached out, they came out of Medina to welcome what they thought was Hussein and Abbas. When they reached the kafilah, when they reached the Ahlul Bayt, there was no Hussein, there was no Ali Akbar, no Abbas. They asked, where is Hussein? Kulthum says, oh people of Yathrib, we left Yathrib, we left Medina, when our house was full, we have left Hussein in the plains of Karbala. We saw our little Ali Asghar being killed in front of us. Hi Azadar and Hussein, my majlis is over. When the women folk, they went to Medina. First they went to the grave of the Prophet. They cried in the grave of the Prophet. Then they went to Baneen and they gave the ta'ziyah of Abdullah, of Uthman, all the other sons of Baneen. Baneen says that tell me what happened to Hussein. They recited the whole waqi of Karbala in front of Hussein. Baneen said, tell me this man, when Hussein was killed, where was Abbas? What happened to Abbas? They said when Hussein was killed, Abbas not only was dead, his hands were cut in front of Abbas trying to fetch water. Baneen turned towards Karbala. He says, Ya Abbas, you have done me proud today. I can stand up in front of Fatima. Allah قوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا ما تنافس.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein.